I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for November the 26th, 2025. Today we are finishing up a three-part series on our theology roundup, addressing Yeshua as Lord of the Sabbath. Our teaching for today is taken from our ministry publication, the Messianic Sabbath Helper. You can take a look at it at outreachisraelbookstore.com. It's available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. All right, so we're going to switch windows really quickly, and we're going to be talking about Yeshua as Lord of the Sabbath from Luke 6, 1 through 5. All right, there we go. So we've done Mark, Matthew, and now Luke. Now it happened on a Sabbath, Shabbat, that he was going through the grain fields. His disciples plucked the heads of grain and ate, rubbing them in their hands. Deuteronomy 23:25. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why do you do that which is not permitted to do on the Sabbath?" Shabbat. Yeshua answering them said, "Have you not read this, what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he entered into God's house and took and ate the showbread, and gave to those who were with him, which is not permitted to eat, except for the priests alone." Leviticus 24, 5 through 9, 1 Samuel 21, 1 through 6. He said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Shabbat. Luke 6, 1 through 5 from the Messianic Apologetics Revised Version, which is an adapted version from the public domain World Messianic Bible, formerly the Hebrew Names Version. All right, so this is going to be shorter than what we addressed on Monday in Mark and what we addressed yesterday in Matthew. Luke 6:1. The Gospel of Luke, notably Volume 1, in a two-volume series along with the book of Acts, Acts 1, 1 and 2, possibly incorporated information written previously in the Gospel of Mark and perhaps also the Gospel of Matthew in order to present a streamlined record of the ministry of Yeshua the Messiah and later the first century ecclesia. Luke's record of Yeshua's disciples plucking heads of grain on the Sabbath is thought by some to be derived from Mark 2, 23 to 28, which we previously addressed on Monday. Luke 6, 1 through 5 includes a number of different details and emphases, although these are hardly contradictory to Mark 2, 23 to 28 and Matthew 12, 1 through 8. The scene opens with the word. Now, during Shabbat, Yeshua was passing through grain fields, and his disciples were picking and eating heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. Luke 6:1, Tree of Life version. What is the orientation of the average Christian reader who encounters the reference to the seventh-day Sabbath and the interchange which will follow? It tends to be one of negativity toward the institution, as though it were a prescribed day of burdensome unwork. Contrary to some of these common sentiments, David L. Balk issues the advisory statement. Quote, "Christian readers often focus on the legalistic demands of Sabbath observance, forgetting its attractions. It is a family day of rest and celebration, not a fasting, insisting that families take time to worship God together despite other cultural and business demands." Unquote. The scene depicted here was Yeshua and his disciples performing some of the necessary tasks of the kingdom of God, and how various onlookers from the religious establishment frowned upon and criticized them for what they were doing. Thankfully, there are indeed examiners who will stress that some background of the rabbinic tradition is important for understanding these events. The Torah, in fact, permitted gleaning from the field, and even you may pluck the ears with your hand. Deuteronomy 23:25, World Messianic Bible. But work is decisively prohibited on the Sabbath. Exodus 20, verse 10, 31, 14, and 15, Leviticus 23:23. Luke 6:2. As it appears in the majority of English Bibles, Luke 6:2 reads, "But some of the Pharisees said, 'Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?'" Revised Standard Version. Many Christian readers, when encountering this, automatically assume that Yeshua and his disciples were culpable of violating Sabbath commandments in the Torah or Law of Moses. But was this really what was the case here? Many examiners are keen to indicate how one or several of the 39 traditional stipulations found in the Mishnah is instead the issue of the disciples picking heads of grain. The generative acts of labor prohibited on the Sabbath are 40 less 1. 1. He who sows. 2. Plows. 3. Reaps. 4. Binds sheaves. 5. Threshes. 6. Winnows. 7. Selects, fit from unfit produce or crops. 8. Grinds. 9. Sifts. 10. Kneads. 11. Bakes. 12. He who shears wool. 13. Washes it. 14. Beats it. 15. Dyes it. 16. Spins. 17. Weaves. 18. Makes 2 loops. 19. Weaves 2 threads. 20. Separates 2 threads. 21. Ties. 22. Unties. 23. Sews 2 stitches. 24. Tears in order to sew 2 stitches. 25. He who traps a deer. 26. Slaughters it. 27. Flays it. 28. Salts it. 29. Cures its hide. 30. Scrapes it. And 31. Cuts it up. 32. He who writes 2 letters. 33. Erases 2 letters in order to write 2 letters. 34. He who builds. 35. Tears down. 36. He who puts out a fire. 37. Kindles a fire. 38. He who hits with a hammer. 39. He who transports an object from one domain to another. Lo, these are the 40 generative acts of labor less 1. Mishnah Shabbat 7:2. Concurrent with this, the disciples may have been accused of preparing food, but whether they were any Pentateuchal proper Sabbath regulations violated, as opposed to some of the varied traditions and customs of Second Temple Judaism, can be textually challenged. Varied translations of uk estin in Luke 6:2, with the verb exesti lacking the root law, are certainly encountered. Some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not allowed on the Sabbath?" Moffat New Testament. And some of the Pharisees said, "Why do you do what is forbidden on the Sabbath?" Richmond Latimer's version. "Why," asked some Pharisees, "are you doing something that isn't permitted on the Sabbath?" Kingdom New Testament. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not permitted on Shabbat?" Tree of Life version. The rendering of uk estin as not permitted or not allowed conveys that a violation of the Mosaic Torah might not actually have been the issue, but instead various halakhic rulings about what is and what is not permitted on Shabbat. This should hardly mean that such halakhic rulings do not possess any value, only that they should not be viewed as conveying the same importance as biblical law. Although he does not note the issue of the term ex esti, Craig A. Evans still does indicate, quote, what is lawful or unlawful is an expression which may refer either to the law of Moses or to the oral laws and traditions of the scribes and Pharisees, unquote. Specification in a text like the Gospel of Luke is important, not to be overlooked. In Luke 6:2 is the reference to tenes, de ton Pharisaion epon, and certain of the Pharisees said to him, said to them, Young's literal translation. The criticism levied against Yeshua and his disciples did not come from the views of all Pharisees. Only certain Pharisees or a Pharisaical sect was represented here. In the view of Robert H. Stein, quote, Luke qualified his source by adding some. He may have done this in order to avoid condemning all the Pharisees. He knew of some good, Luke 13:31, Acts 5:34-39, and even Christian Pharisees, Acts 15:5, unquote. John Nolland also thinks, quote, Mark tends to treat the Pharisees as a fixed group. Luke is more ready to differentiate, unquote. While one cannot press options too hard, the brevity of Mark's gospel, in contrast to the streamlined specification of Luke's gospel, may have required some fine-tuning here and there, lest the first century believers get the impression that all Pharisees everywhere were enemies of the good news and of Yeshua the Messiah. Luke 6:3. Luke detailed how Yeshua directed the Pharisees present that there was an issue of his disciples being hungry, noting a past experience of David and his men. Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? Luke 6:3, New International Version. It is not stated in the text how hungry the disciples were, but David and his party were certainly hungry enough. 1 Samuel 21, 1-6. The issue of hunger was indeed asserted by the Messiah to be much bigger than potential violation of small Sabbath restrictions. And it may also be true that the Messiah himself and what he was doing in declaring the kingdom of heaven was more important than the institution of the seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat. But is there an intention here for some kind of future abolition of the seventh-day Sabbath? R. Alan Culpepper's remarks include some statements of accuracy and inaccuracy. Quote, Jesus authorizes the provision of food for the hungry, even if it means violation of the Sabbath. The effects of the new era inaugurated by Jesus continue to ripple outward, sweeping away old conventions, requiring the revaluing of ritual observances in relation to persons, and eliciting opposition from the guardians of religious tradition, unquote. Messianics favorable to the continued validity of the seventh-day Sabbath should not take issue with Yeshua the Messiah inaugurating a new era, where various conventions of the past do indeed have to give way to the effects of his salvific work. But did Yeshua actually authorize explicit violation or transgression of the Sabbath in Luke 6, 1-5? This can and should be challenged. Luke 6:4. The major issue for David and his party was how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which no one is permitted to eat except the Kohanim, priests. Luke 6:4, Complete Jewish Bible. The 12 loaves composing the consecrated bread were to be presented before the Lord in the tabernacle or temple and were only permitted to be eaten by the Levitical priests. Leviticus 24, 5 through 9. David, as the then future king of Israel, had the authority to override a minor Torah regulation to see that he and his party received nourishment. He and his party were permitted to eat the consecrated bread on the condition that they had not had sexual relations. 1 Samuel 21, 4 and 5. David and his men ate the bread of the presence with impunity. Yeshua the Messiah is the son of David. Luke 3:32, Acts 2:30 to 36, 13:34 to 39, and so similarly has authority over what can and cannot be done on the Sabbath. Evans appropriately observes, quote, Jesus is implying that just as David was going about the task of establishing a new reign in Israel, so now is Jesus going about a similar task. Just as David's special circumstances made it permissible to eat the consecrated bread, so the present circumstances made it permissible for Jesus and his disciples to harvest some food for themselves. Unquote. There need not be any disregard of the institution of the seventh-day Sabbath by Yeshua the Messiah making a reference to the then future King David eating the bread of the presence. Instead, Yeshua had directed his detractors to an example from the Tanakh, where there was a violation of minor Torah instructions because of a much more important situation regarding David and his party. Yeshua's disciples plucking heads of grain on Shabbat was a much less serious issue. I. Howard Marshall is generally correct in his conclusion. Quote, Jesus claims the right to reinterpret the Old Testament law on the basis that already in the Old Testament itself, it was possible for David to override it. Luke brings together the figures of David and the Son of Man to show that Jesus acts as the antitype of David and authorizes his followers to do likewise. Unquote. More permissible regarding what would be and not be allowed is Robert H. Stein, who asserts, quote, if David was free of the restraints of the law on that occasion, how much more is the Son of Man? Unquote. Joel B. Green has a much better wording as he labels what is seen as, quote, the relaxation of legal observance in the face of human need, unquote. However, those who believe in a post-resurrection era continuance for the Sabbath will probably approach this scene the most from what Nolan says. Quote, David looked like a lawbreaker when he acted according to the law's true intention. Unquote. For within the Torah are both weighty and less weighty matters, with the preservation of human life being among the most significant issues. Luke 6:5. The significant assertion from the Messiah closing this scene is, the Son of Man is Lord of Shabbat. Luke 6:5, Tree of Life version. How should readers approach kurios estin tu sabbatu ha huios tu anthropou? Some have taken the reference to Son of Man as being a generic reference to a human being being the master of the Sabbath, and hence with people able to evaluate for themselves what should and should not be done on the Sabbath. More have taken the reference to the Son of Man being Lord of the Sabbath as Yeshua the Messiah being the one who possesses the authority to determine what is and what is not permitted on the Sabbath. This would require Son of Man to be regarded as a messianic title, and in association with the Daniel 7, 13, and 14 theophany, the figure of the Son of Man being seated next to the Ancient of Days, and being the one whom the entire creation must serve and revere. The Son of Man being Lord of the Sabbath is a very serious claim for Yeshua to have made, as Marshall properly indicates. Quote, "The point of the saying is that here Jesus claims an authority tantamount to that of God with respect to the interpretation of the law." Unquote. Leon Morris is one who is notably critical to Son of Man being a reference to a human being in general, also describing how Yeshua is describing a divine messianic function in being Lord of the Sabbath here. Quote, "He claims that he, the Son of Man, is Lord of the Sabbath. This is a staggering claim, for the Sabbath was of divine institution, Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. To be Lord of a divine institution is to have a very high place indeed. Some take Son of Man to mean man, as the Aramaic original often does. They take the verse to mean that man is supreme over the Sabbath. This would fit neatly with the preceding, but there are difficulties. Yeshua never taught that man is Lord over divine institution. Again, in the Gospels, Son of Man invariably means Jesus. He is surely referring to his messianic function. It may be significant that this follows a reference to David's action. It is the son of David who is Lord. If David could override the law without blame, how much more could the much greater Son of David do so?" Unquote. While it is clear enough from the record of Luke 6, 1 through 5, that some things, because of the needs of the moment, are more important than the standard, customary formalities of the Sabbath, and that Yeshua the Messiah is Lord of the Sabbath and can determine what is permitted on the Sabbath, is there at all an intended future abolition of the Sabbath detectable here? Green is among those Christian commentators who doubts it. Quote, "For Jesus, the question is, who interprets Scripture, and so the Sabbath law correctly? Or to put it more starkly, who knows and represents God's will? Not the Sabbath law per se, but this more fundamental question comes to the fore in Jesus' response to his rivals in verses 3 and 9. In both instances, Jesus' analysis is the same. Scribal specifications have missed the salvific purpose of God resident in the Sabbath. But Jesus, in declaring the onset of the eschatological jubilee, see above on 4, 18 and 19, has made this day, today, 421, the day for providing for humans. Jesus is less concerned with abrogating Sabbath law and more concerned with bringing the grace of God to concrete expression in his own ministry, not least on the Sabbath." Unquote. Green does think that the Messiah is more important than the Sabbath, as the will of God should be centered in him and not in just one day out of the week. Green draws the further appropriate conclusion that the scene in view highlights not any kind of Sabbath violation, but instead the Messiah as the one who gets to determine what is permissible activity on the Sabbath. Quote, "The disciples have not violated the Sabbath as they had been accused. Rather, the Son of Man, who has authority over the Sabbath, has permitted them to pluck and eat on the Sabbath. This is not a rejection of the Sabbath or of Sabbath observance in general, but it does undercut the utility of Sabbath observance as a boundary-keeping mechanism, i.e., as a sign of faithfulness to God, and it designates Jesus as God's authorized agent to determine what was appropriate on the Sabbath." Unquote. Noland likewise emphasizes that what is intended here is not Sabbath violation, but Sabbath application, and further concludes that the Messiah demonstrated the true intentions of the Sabbath by allowing his disciples to pluck heads of grain. Quote, "When David acted in this way, it is to be understood that he interpreted the true intention of the inscripturated will of God. So also it should be understood that when the Son of Man makes provision for his disciples on the Sabbath, he is not violating the Sabbath, but is Lord of the Sabbath, revealing its true significance." Unquote. It should be enough for today's Bible readers to recognize that Yeshua the Messiah and his disciples did not violate strict biblical Sabbath instructions in Luke 6:1-5. But following the example of David before them, had some unique circumstances which required them to disregard the customs of their day so they could eat. It should also be enough for today's Bible readers to conclude that the issue in Luke 6:1-5 was hardly some intended abrogation of the seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat by Yeshua the Messiah, but instead that as Lord of the Sabbath, he gets to determine the proper course of action for his followers, and that his reign indeed permits a reevaluation of some of the customary prohibitions for the day. Yeshua the Messiah is more important than the seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat. But this same Yeshua the Messiah is Lord of the Sabbath or Shabbat. Keeping the Sabbath without a focus upon him and what he has done may mean a detachment from his kingdom and the benefits of the redemption he provides. All right. And that concludes our three-part series on Lord of the Sabbath. Now we're going to switch screens. Yes, and once again, this has been taken from our ministry's massive publication, the Messianic Sabbath Helper. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup for today. Let's now switch over to the news roundup. And of course, we do the news roundup after the theology roundup because, more than anything else, the news changes from day to day. We are continually reminded to, number one, be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia and Ukraine. And number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. Because right now, tomorrow here in the United States, we will be celebrating the Thanksgiving holiday. Many people will be around family, good friends. There's going to be a lot of discussions about what's taken place in the past year, especially since election 2024. There's going to be a lot of discussion about, the current Mideast situation, what's possibly going to be happening between Russia and Ukraine, what's going to be unfolding here in the U.S. And hopefully, when we look back on the past year, and our family will probably do this as many others will, we'll go around the table and we'll say, what is the one thing you are thankful for? Well, I can tell you that I'm certainly thankful that we're continuing to be able to serve the Messianic community every day. We definitely go day to day, week to week, month to month, it seems. There are things which do concern me, but as a born-again believer, I appeal to God every day for his protection and the provision of being able to serve him in a venue like this. And I hope you all are very thankful yourselves as well for the ability to continue to live your life, continue to serve the Lord, and continue to make a difference in your sphere of influence. All right, we don't have that many stories right now. Only 7, actually. That's hardly a surprise because of the Thanksgiving holiday. All right, this came across my feed on Instagram yesterday. This is Bruce Mejia with the channel Wild Olive Tree. We've referenced him before, especially when he has gone after our friend, Hello, Mrs. Rachel. Now here, you can watch this in its entirety, but he refers to Ted Cruz, who spoke at an event where he was talking about how there are a lot of young people in the contemporary church who they're in their 20s, they're in their early 30s. Unlike those who preceded them, they are not supporters of the state of Israel and Zionism, certainly on biblical grounds. And Bruce Mejia, who's a strong supporter of supersessionism, replacement theologies, just kind of pridefully says yes, and I'm so glad that our outreach can help contribute to that. So he is very thankful, doesn't hide his position at all, that he can help the cause of replacement theology. And over the next couple of years, there are going to be some, I think that this presidency, Donald Trump, and who he's possibly grooming as a successor, whether it's J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio, and what's going to happen after Donald Trump leaves, that's going to be very determinant on whether the causes of supersessionism, anti-Zionism, anti-Judaism are deterred, whether they're slowed down, or whether they accelerate. So we're at a very critical point. And of course, that also dovetails with what's going to happen in the future of the Messianic community. So we keep our eyes on this. We keep our ears to what's happening, and I've got an open file regarding what the Lord would have us do, produce regarding supersessionism, replacement theology, because this guy just flat says, God didn't have any purpose of establishing Israel in 1948. No further purpose regarding Israel or the Jewish people, and that's a huge problem. Before we do something, a project, what do we have to wait on out there in the world of ideas? We will wait and see. Okay, so this is an article which from yesterday, the 25th of November, from Charisma Magazine. The headline is, AI predicts a 2030 tribulation window as biblical signs converge. Okay, so to be honest, and you all can read through this article, it's not that long, but here it talks about the most surprising development came when he asked this person, Randy Kay, asked AI to analyze biblical prophecy frameworks alongside modern events. He fed it Daniel's 70 weeks, the fig tree generation in Matthew 24, Israel's 1948 rebirth, Jewish sabbatical cycles, and today's geopolitical shifts. The conclusion wasn't a prediction, but a pattern. If the models are valid, the tribulation most plausibly falls between 2028 and 2032, with 2030 showing the most substantial alignment. Okay. And then this would lead to placing the end around 2036 to 2037. All right. I want to make it perfectly clear right now, although that image right there kind of looks like the emperor sitting on the throne from Rise of Skywalker, which came out 6 years ago. That's kind of interesting. But we do not get our theology from artificial intelligence. This is one proposal out there. Look, people are going to be paying attention to what happens between now and the end of the decade. No problem there. Just look at all the social, political, religious changes which have taken place over the past 5 to 6 years. No problem there. And there are different road signs we see along the way. Yeah, I mean, a lot of us are very concerned about what's happening today. We're going to make the most of every day serving the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. When I see some of the things which are taking place in the Messianic community and its future, or maybe not what it thinks it's going to be, that's concerning as well. But God is sovereign. He looks down at us every day. He knows what we're supposed to be doing. And we do, as his sons and daughters, as his children, we do have access to the infinite power of heaven. That is undeniably true. Okay, so we do have some news. Here in the Western Hemisphere, this is from Open Source Intel yesterday, 5:20 p.m. Maduro, that's Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, says that Venezuela is experiencing a decisive juncture for its existence as a republic. We have no idea what's going to happen in Venezuela, but as I have said before, when I lived in Central Florida, not so much here in North Texas, but we did know a lot of people who were from Venezuela who had left because of the political changes. And there are a lot of sincere, good, Christian believers in Venezuela, as all over North America. So pray for the believers, regardless of what happens. But there is a major naval buildup in the Caribbean Sea. So we wait and see what happens. All right. So Reason and Sanity here on the American home front. This is getting a lot of circulation on social media. 2-minute, 6-second clip from Tucker Carlson. So this is from Yashar Ali, who says, Tucker Carlson tells Sean Ryan's show that Zionism is an attack on Western civilization. Tucker also says Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is Western civilization's main enemy and compares him to the Nazis. So, a lot of people have noted the ongoing challenges of a Candace Owens. Tucker Carlson is not that far behind. And some of this is just getting more irrational and illogical, but a lot of younger people, they're easily influenced by it. So I'm sure that in the coming weeks, there are going to be a lot of people who comment on this and perhaps other future posts, future clips from different social media influencers. Here is an interesting story. This is from ABC News. Some of you all may have heard it. This is from yesterday. The headline, Climate Activist Greta Thunberg banned from Venice after the Grand Canal was dyed green in an act of protest. So here we have climate activist Greta Thunberg was temporarily banned from Venice after the Italian city's Grand Canal was dyed green in an act of protest. Many people have observed, well, with the Gaza situation now relatively taken care of, with things having died down there. Now she's gone back to climate activism and, among other things, dyeing the Grand Canal in Venice bright green. Okay, from Instagram yesterday, Newsmax, Trump, MBS, that's Mohammed bin Salman, meeting grew tense over Israel. So last week's meeting between President Donald Trump and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman turned tense when the discussion shifted to Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords and normalizing relations with Israel. And even though there were headlines, and we certainly mentioned them, which said that, hey, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is going to Washington, we're expecting him to perhaps normalize relations with the state of Israel and join the Abraham Accords. That did not happen. That wasn't a huge surprise. And a lot of it comes down to, are the people of Saudi Arabia, is the population ready for this? Because as is the case in a lot of these Arab Islamic countries, the leadership, whether it's some kind of monarchy, some kind of presidency, the leaders, they tend to be favorable to the West. They tend to be Western educated. They tend to be, forward thinking, for the Middle East. They recognize that pragmatically they need to have good relations with the United States, with Europe. Certainly, if they don't have official relations with the state of Israel, they need to have some kind of back channel method of communication. But the population is, sits to the right of their leaders. That's not atypical to even certain religious situations where different religious leaders, whether they're in Judaism, Christianity, they tend to be, much more well-read in the Bible, biblical composition, theology. They tend to be more forward-thinking than a lot of the people they serve. That doesn't mean that they're liberal, but it means that they're a little more careful when certain controversies come up. They tend to be more flexible, and certain people are just not ready for that conversation. They're not ready for that topic. So it is true that if Saudi Arabia, sort of the crown jewel of the Middle East, the Arab Islamic world, if it were to have political relations, open political relations with the state of Israel, that would prove to be absolutely massive. Okay, and then finally, because yesterday we did talk a lot about Russia, Ukraine, a potential peace agreement. 26-second clip here, President Trump on Air Force One, obviously going down to Mar-a-Lago for the Thanksgiving holiday. Fox News, just in, President Trump on peace negotiations. We're having good talks. We started with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it, and they'd like to see it end. And we won't know for a little while, but we're making progress. Okay. We don't know what to expect between now and the end of the year in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but pressure is definitely building, especially following the relative conclusion, although there's still start and stops, to Israel, Gaza. And no matter what Hamas tries to do now, because there was a formal ceasefire, they're going to be under huge scrutiny. So we do continue to pray for peace in the world, and we will doubtlessly see what kind of political or world events there are regarding what takes place over the Thanksgiving holiday. All right, so that concludes our news roundup. Now, I am planning to take the next few days off, like many of you are, because of the Thanksgiving holiday here in the U.S. We've got a lot of family coming into town, so we're going to be entertaining the next few days. It is likely that by Saturday, Sunday, I'll post some kind of a McKee moment short, but I can't guarantee that. So we will not be resuming Messianic Insider until December the 1st, which is a Monday. And then, of course, from there on out, we're going to be covering a lot of things like the winter holiday season with Hanukkah, December the 25th coming up, etc. And some of you all have suggested some very good topics for us to be discussing on Messianic Insider in the coming weeks and months. So we're very appreciative of that. We can't cover everything at once, but this is a 5 times a week, not this week, live stream. And a lot of time and effort goes into that. And we certainly, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, greatly appreciate, we're thankful for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, support for everything we do here. And I encourage you, if you have not, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net, where you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries, back issues of Outreach Israel News. You can look up some back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, and generally speaking, take a look at our adventures from over the years. And please, if you haven't, be sure to give this live stream a thumbs up or a heart. It definitely will help its exposure on social media. We will see you again on Monday, December the 1st, with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.